Good, good. I'm going to grab some water first here. I've definitely made this mistake before in the past. Okay. All right. Well then, hello Webstock. It's so good to be here. I want to start by thanking the conference organizers for this absolutely incredible event. This is just spectacular. My name is Hannah, or Han on the internet, that's where you can find me, and I'm based in London. And actually, today, in fact, February 14th, is my London anniversary. Exactly 8 years ago on this day, I got off a plane at Heathrow Airport and never went back home. And today I'm standing here in New Zealand. It's a funny life. Home originally actually is Canada. This is where I'm from. It's this sort of small city called Edmonton. It's pretty far north. It's pretty isolated, I'd say. It's quite a conservative sort of place. And the reason that I'm telling you this is there's someone else here actually that I want to thank today too, besides the organizers. She's actually speaking later today. I'm going to tell you a little story, which is that when I was about 17 years old or so, in the late 90s, I was thinking about going to design school, and I was pretty sure that that's what I wanted to do with my life. But I was having a little bit of trouble convincing my parents, who were paying for my education, that this was going to be like a real life plan, right? And I was actually, I think they were a bit worried about me ever having a career in design. And to be quite honest, I was actually a little bit worried about this too, because, I didn't know any designers. I come from this sort of like small place. Having a design career sort of seemed like something that I don't know, fancy men from big cities did or something. And it was at this exact precise moment that I came across the work of Paula Scher, actually. And at that time in my life, she was the first famous woman designer that I'd ever come across. And not only did I fall in love with her work, but also something just sort of slid into place in my 17-year-old brain, and I thought, yeah, I can do this too. So thanks, Paula. I don't know if I'd be up here today if it wasn't for that moment. Oh, thank you. So today I'm a product designer. I work mainly in music. These are some of the people that I've worked for. And I split my time between two things. Myself and my business partner, Matthew Ogle, have a product consultancy called Matt and Han, and we also have a startup called This Is My Jam. So This Is My Jam is a way to share your favorite song right now. It's not just any song, but it's the song that you really love, the one that you've got on repeat, the one that you can't get out of your head, your jam, right? And it's a way to share it in a really beautiful way, in a unique way that's more than just sort of a line of text on a screen. And what you get in return for this is a playlist of music from your friends, and this is sort of where the magic happens, I think, because since every song is handpicked by somebody who absolutely loves music, it's sort of a way to cut through all the choice out there and sort of just bring up to the top the really good stuff, like the solid gold hits. And it's every genre, it's old stuff, it's new stuff, it's popular, it's obscure, but just good music. And besides working on sort of big, serious projects like this, you might know me from some other silly things that I do, like this one, which tells you what to drink depending on what music you're listening to, also might kill you, or this one, which takes you on an undersea musical adventure of what you've listened to in the past, or most recently, this one, which tells you what one song you should listen to if you want to check out a new band. Other very highly important things that you need to know about me are that I play in a real orchestra. I play cello. We play music that looks like that in places like that. And I also play with a comedy orchestra that looks a little bit more like this. And that's a rehearsal venue there. And my favorite film is Monsters, Inc. And this is my favorite picture on the internet. Yeah, it's good, isn't it? I model all my hairstyles after these guys. All right, okay. I realize that I'm the only thing right now that's separating you from lunch, so let's get on with this. Okay, today I'm going to be talking about some feelings, and the reason that I'm going to talk about this is because back up to the design school thing here, as you know, I did end up getting to go. Everything was kind of moving along all right in my career. I did manage to go to design school. I managed to get a design job. That was really good. My parents were pretty happy about that. I moved to Toronto, which is sort of a better city for design, and I got a better job, and that was really good. And then I got an even better job, which was really fun, working at Last FM, and I was leading design there, and I had a ton of autonomy. It was really great. And then at that point, this happened. And I was like, wait, this is totally not how my career trajectory is supposed to go at all. This is not it. And in 2011, basically, at that point in my life, I just felt like I couldn't make anything anymore. I was completely burnt out, frustrated, exhausted. I'd obviously been kind of working my ass off to get here. But at that point, I couldn't even pick up a pencil and draw anymore. And that's a pretty scary feeling to go through. And so, what do you do at that point? Well, I quit my job, and I packed up my bags, and I ran away from it all, like you do. So a few months later, I was in Hong Kong, and I was still pretty miserable at this point. I still felt like I couldn't make anything, and that tap of creativity that I was so used to just being able to turn on whenever I wanted to, now it just wouldn't even work. And the scariest thing about this actually was that tap of creativity, of course, was and is the only way that I have to make a living. So at that moment, this is what happens. I get this text from an old friend of mine and a colleague, and he's asking, when are you going to be back on the grid? You've been gone for months. Where are you? I need a designer to help with this project. Can you give me a hand here? And I look down at my phone, and I'm thinking about this. And even though in that precise moment I felt like there's no way I can ever make anything again, I decided that that's what the commitment to a creative life is saying yes. Because no matter how fucked you might be, there's really only one way out of this situation, which is to keep making. All right, enough of me. We're done now with that part. So why does this actually matter to you guys? Well, I'm curious, how many people here today have experienced something, hopefully on a slightly less drastic scale than that, like this, what I went through? Yeah, quite a lot of you. Get some nice music. Right, so my story is not unique. And also, after talking about this issue with people in our community, I've discovered that actually this is something that probably quite a lot of people go through. And, there's ways you're probably already familiar with, this one and this one and this one. And, those things are cool and stuff. Don't get me wrong, sometimes I like that too. But they're not, super effective in the long run, right? That's the problem. And secondly, the other reason why this is really important to talk about and why I'm up here talking about it today, even though it's, not a super fun topic, is that as makers, you'd think that one of the most important things to learn would be how to take care of our abilities to make things, right? To keep going. But yet, from my conversations with peers, I'm really not convinced that actually happens. And that is so crazy because, if we don't, take care of our ability to make things, then, that's the only way we have to make a living, right? And it doesn't matter what you call yourself, whether you're a designer or a developer, we're all makers, we all need to take care of this. I'm not convinced that happens, which is why I'm talking about it today. And if we don't talk about that problem, then another thing happens, which that it's totally self-reinforcing as well, right? And I've spent a lot of time in the startup community, and I think especially there, this is a huge issue. I've seen so many coworkers go through similar bouts of burnout. In fact, it's so much of an issue that people almost talk about it like the opposite, work as hard as you can, like it's some kind of competition all the time in startup land. We really focus on tools. We focus on the efficiency of them, and we're like, lean this and like minimum viable that and all this stuff. And we treat ourselves like a tool that can be optimized for higher performance, right? And I find we sort of separate the making from the maker. All right, you guys have been with me this far. I think it's time for a little hungover owl break here. Yeah. This is probably what I'm going to look like tomorrow morning. Okay, so back in the game. I know it's nearly lunchtime, right? So back here, it's Hong Kong. It's April 2011. I've accepted this gig that I can't do, right? This is how I feel at that time. There's no way I can do this. So how did I dig myself out of this hole here, right? Well, 3 years later, these are the methods that worked pretty well for me to overcome my maker's block and have continued to do so as I've sort of worked on this as a design problem. And this isn't really just about fixing what was broken, because obviously there was a lot of stuff that was broken, but also redesigning my life in a way to make sure that it wouldn't happen again, or if it did happen, maybe it wouldn't happen quite so badly. And, what works for me might not work for you. This is absolutely not some kind of 5-step self-help guide thing, but really just a way to give you guys a few more tools to tuck into your toolkits, and if something's useful for you along the way, then that's cool. All right, so this first one here, I have to say, Liz kind of already gave you guys the ultimate talk on this, but I'll give you my take on it quickly here. So quitting, or knowing when to stop, I think is the first most important thing for keeping yourself creative. I think that my generation, and the people younger than me especially, we sort of come from this world of things that don't really have an end. So an example of this is instead of having, the physical end of a record, for instance, we just press pause on music on our phones, right? It's not even stop, it's pause. And we craft digital things where we can tweak and update and push a commit whenever we want to. It's not really a world where we have to think about stopping. And I think that this lesson is much easier to learn, or at least be reminded of, in the physical medium. So I would urge you, if you do want to think about this more, to try doing something where it's physical, because I think you have to learn how to stop really quickly then. The first time I ever came into contact with this principle was in design school. It was one of my painting classes, and we had this lesson where it was just this really horrible day where we all learned about overpainting, which is just, basically when you should have stopped painting yesterday, but you kept going, and now you've just totally ruined the thing that you're working on. And of course, what do you have to do? Well, there's only one choice. You have to throw that out and start all over again. And now you've only got 6 hours before the crit or something like that, right? That doesn't really happen in the digital world. In coding, though, this manifests itself as things like over-optimizing or over-architecting. And it's also, it's applicable when you're working on a really small part of something, knowing when to stop, or it's applicable in a much bigger system, like life, what Liz was talking about with quitting something much larger. For me, I really had to learn the hard way of when to quit my job at Last.fm and stop. And the reason that I think that this is so important, at least for me, is because of this little cycle here that I have. So my brain is not very big. It can only hold so many ideas at once. And they come in, and then I need to finish them, I need to do them and get them out of my brain so that I can get more stuff inside of there. And if I don't have this step where I stop and finish and get the ideas out, then it all just sort of gets clogged up, and there's no space for more things to come in, no more interesting inputs, right? And it's those inputs exactly which keeps you creative, I believe. All right, the second thing here, which is start with something shit. So I think that when we feel like we can't make things, we're on a very sort of steep and slippery slope to feeling like we're never going to be able to make anything at all. And I think that this is even harder at the beginning of a project because there's this additional barrier to overcome. And this additional barrier is that sort of blank canvas or blank paper, blank text editor feeling, right? So something that I do, just a little silly thing, is I've always kept a sketchbook my whole life. But I've also been kind of intimidated by my sketchbook too. When I get a new one and it's like all, clean, nice paper, it's like, how am I going to start working on this thing? So what I do is I just open it up and I just doodle something really ridiculous in it, usually like the date, and then flip the page over and get on with life and actually start working on stuff. And that works really well for me. Another example, and I can't believe I'm about to show you this, but this is one of the very first sketches that I did for This Is My Jam. And, as you can see, the bones are there, the idea is there, but it's super, super rough. But I never would have been able to get to this, which is what it looks like today, if I hadn't made that shit thing first and just kind of accepted that it might be shit to get on with it and move forward to something better. And I look at these profile screens today and I still see, a ton of problems with them, and that's cool because it's going to change again. So I think that, this iterative culture that you guys have heard about before, and I don't need to bang on about, embracing that and just, knowing that the first thing you make is going to be probably bad is a good way of getting over that. And this doesn't just exist in our discipline either. There's lots of other places too where this works really well for people. Anne Lamott, who wrote Bird by Bird, which is a really great book on writing and also creativity, she calls upon writers to write shitty first drafts and just get it over with. Or Fred Brooks, who you might also be familiar with, he wrote The Mythical Man Month. He says about first systems in computing, plan to throw one away because you will anyhow, right? Okay, so the third thing here is about letting the action create the motivation. So taking that small first step, making the shit prototype that nobody will see except for you, will motivate you to do more. And this is something that Julia Cameron talks about as well in her book, The Artist's Way, also a great read. I think there's this common misconception here about motivation, that it's sort of all of a sudden the idea strikes, this lightning bolt comes down, and now I know what I want to make. And I've encountered this many times when journalists have interviewed Matt and I about This Is My Jam, and they'll ask for the genesis story, how did you come up with This Is My Jam? And every time they get a little bit disappointed when we tell them the answer, because I think what they want to hear is one day we just woke up and had this idea and bam. And it's of course it didn't work like that. Of course it didn't. It was years and years of working in the online music industry and talking to people and trying to understand how they discover music and what they care about and how they want to consume it, and understanding licensing and the shifting landscape and all that mess. And it wasn't through that we came up with the idea for This Is My Jam. So I like to sort of think of the model the other way around. If you want to use this lightning bolt metaphor, I'd say you have to kind of do something first and let the sky get dark and stormy and moody, and then the lightning strikes. So when I felt like I couldn't make anything at all, really couldn't make anything at all, I took a really small first step, and what I did was I made a garden, which is kind of a silly thing to do in the city, but it was creative, kind of. It was a little bit technical. You make things, you get to grow stuff. And it was just enough to sort of get me a little bit motivated and want to make something bigger from that. So I don't really think it matters what it is that you do, just the point is that you take some kind of really small action to get started with, and that will lead to something bigger. Okay, so number 4. I need to talk about habits. There's sort of 3 types of habits that I think about regularly. One is one that our industry places a lot of importance on, and that's the sort of habit of process for getting things done. And for the most part, I think this is probably good, though that's probably an entirely different talk. But if you use Agile, for instance, that's an example of that kind of habit for getting things done. And then there's a second habit, which there's a great choreographer, Twyla Tharp. She's written a book called The Creative Habit. She talks about this habit a lot, and I really like what she has to say about it. This is the kind of daily ritual habit, right? This is the stuff that we force ourselves to do on a regular basis to like keep the tools sharp. And she has this great story of like how every morning she takes a New York cab to her gym to do this like crazy workout routine at some like horribly early hour in the morning. And to her, just the act of getting in the cab is what makes it a ritual. And that's why she does it that way. She doesn't have to take a cab, but she does to make it a ritual. And you might have a ritual like, reading something every day or going to a site that you normally visit to keep your tools sharp. There's those kinds of habits. But there is a third, I think, and much more elusive type of habit that we don't talk about that much. And that's sort of this idea that we need to, I think, create patterns for personal serendipity, sort of create these pockets of time for unusual stuff to happen. And actually, quitting or feeling uncomfortable, as we heard about earlier, might be a way of doing this. And these pockets of time, they don't always work. You don't always get something good out of it. But sometimes you do. And if you don't have that pocket of time in the first place, then you don't even offer yourself that chance. And the reason I think that you need this so much is that creativity requires unusual inputs. It needs something surprising. It needs to let that unusual in. If you just do what you know, or if you just sort of stay safe, then eventually sort of that cycle will get a little bit broken, I think, the one for new ideas. So some examples of this are with the Jam team. Something that we do regularly is we try and go on these retreats, and we usually just go somewhere. We're based in London, so we go somewhere kind of cheap-ish in Europe. This is one that we did on the Spanish coast, where it's absolutely beautiful there. That's our retreat. And just by putting everybody in a completely different location, and an unusual and inspiring location, all of a sudden these new ideas come out that otherwise you might have not had happen. And I found that these retreats are not very good for just getting work done, but what they are really good for is like big picture stuff, like how are we going to do X, or what's the future look like for this company, that kind of thing. But it doesn't even have to be that extravagant or that, that big. It could be something like really, really tiny too. For instance, another thing I do is I use this site called 750 Words to journal most days. And just by giving myself a regular pocket of time to sit down and write and let the unexpected come out in my writing, that's a way that I explore sort of like new ideas that otherwise, I just wouldn't have had the time for. I wouldn't have noticed them. Or another thing I do, I can't believe I'm showing you this either, is that I go on walks around my neighborhood, and sometimes I pick the moss because I really like the texture of it. I steal it and take it home for my garden. But the thing about the moss stealing walks is they're sort of like a regular thing that I do that gives me a little bit of time to think. And if I didn't have that, I might not let that unexpected into my life. Okay, so the fifth, and this is definitely the most important thing, which is why I've saved it for last, is to do something different. So again, I think it was in that same painting class, actually, where we learned about overpainting. My prof also gave us another piece of advice, which was to always have two canvases going at the same time, preferably in two different mediums, like one, acrylic and one oil or something. And his notion was that, when you get stuck working on this one and you're just like, I have no idea where this is supposed to go, you can turn around and work on this one, and then magically, sort of by working on this other thing, you'll kind of unstick yourself with this one and be able to go back to it. And this is something that I've used pretty much my entire career, this sort of like multidisciplinary approach, and I think I forgot about it a while when I was working really hard on one thing and focusing on it, but it's absolutely the thing that brought me back more than anything else. So try taking the skills that you have and shifting them just a little bit, like maybe it's a different paradigm or a different language or a different medium, but just something that is slightly different from what you normally do. So just during this time where I was like working full time as a product designer, I took on all these side projects of print work and collaborations and stuff. I worked on a comic, I made a cookbook, I worked on some identity projects, a bunch of things like this. And it was really those side projects that I think brought me back. And this was not a medium that I was familiar working in. I hadn't worked in print in a really long time. But by doing it, it sort of, it made me feel much more able to get unstuck in this other area. And I think another thing that, even if none of this, has helped you out today at all, I think another thing that I want to mention, which I'd love for you to take home, is that it's not just about doing something different, but it's also about being someone different too. And what I mean by this, and something that I'm really only able to say now in hindsight after this, was that in my case particularly, I found like the field of tech and the area that I was working in, it was one that was quite homogenous. And so I ended up stifling a lot of things about myself, a lot of things that normally I would express. For instance, like fashion, I find to be very inspiring as a visual input. But I would stifle that and sort of try to assimilate bits of like the geek culture that I was sort of surrounded by. It wasn't bad, but it was just stuff that wasn't really maybe native to me. And I ended up doing stuff like wearing baggy t-shirts and trainers, which I actually hate. But I was so concerned about fitting in or just being judged on the merit of my work and not on anything else, that I ended up stifling a lot of my usual sort of self-expression. And this was absolutely the worst thing that I could do, because this is another little brain cycle thing that I have, which is that I get excited about something and I want to express myself around it, and then in turn that, gets me more inspired, and then from that inspiration I want to express it again. And if you cut off one of these things, if I stop expressing myself in some way, it sort of breaks this cycle too. So this is sort of my call upon you to embrace more diversity in our industry, because I'm sure that I can't be the only one that's felt like this or experienced something like this, and it just makes it a more inspiring place for everybody. So once you've figured out which methods work for you, and like I said, these ones might not, they might, I don't know, codify them, write them down, make them a part of who you are, like what I'm doing today, and also, talk about them with your coworkers as well, so that they understand that if you have some quirky habit, like walking around the neighborhood and stealing your neighbor's moss, that's actually, it's not weird, but it's actually really important for keeping you creative, keeping you able to make stuff, which is probably something that they're pretty invested in, right? All right, we're nearly at the end. I'm gonna let you out a few minutes early so you can go get some food. And I still haven't told you what's up with all the animals. You guys are probably wondering, right? Okay, so I drew this guy, this grumpy otter. I really liked him, and I had a lot of fun doing it. And then later on, I was at this farm show, and I got to hold this African spotted eagle owl named Duster, who was amazing. He was like the softest thing that I have ever touched in my life, way better than the moss. And then I got this magic pen, this Wacom pen, which is pretty cool. It records pen strokes to vectors. And I thought, oh, this is pretty neat, but I totally need a project to motivate me to learn how to use this thing, right? And I knew that I wanted to write a talk about Maker's Block. I knew that was an important thing that I wanted to share with the community, but I needed to get the energy from somewhere to do that, right? I needed an action to get the motivation going. And I also needed an unusual element. I needed something, for this personal serendipity. I needed to do something different, which is why sometimes you need to draw animals. Thanks very much.